Hello, Petal. How are you doing? How was your weekend? Did you have a good time? Thank you for coming back again to join me for Chapter 8 of May Contain Traces of Magic, J.W. Wells and Co. Book the 6 thereof. A quick recap. Oh my crikey. I hope that will suffice. So, as the pollen's a bit high today, I'm going to get on with this and get cracking so we can keep going. And we have got Chapter 8. As ever, if you could hit the notifications bell if you haven't already, or share and subscribe if you feel you like the content. And if you enjoy this chapter, if you could put a little bing, little digit on the like, a little bing, that'd be absolutely awesome because it helps keep the channel going the way it does. So, yes. Anyway, I am glad you're here. I'm very grateful that you're here. And I'll stop waffling so we can get on with the book. Apologies. Chapter 8. Hello, Chris replied. Thanks for driving me home, she said. Would you like to come in for a coffee? Said the spider to the fly. He was still holding the tape measure. Sorry about the music, she said. It's probably the worst song ever released, even including James Blunt. That's why I chose it, of course. Not making a great deal of sense, he thought, though he couldn't fault her taste in music. Who the hell are you? He said, still not looking round. I'm SatNav, she replied, as you know perfectly well. Look, if you're upset about me driving us here. Upset? Marvellous choice of words. Yes, he said, and stay away from me. You don't know where I've been. It was the voice that did it, of course, either because it was pitched exactly right to dig down deep into the male libido, or because he was conditioned to do what it told him. Both. Whatever, he turned his head and looked at her. Do you trust me? She said. At last a question he could answer. Yes, he replied, but only as far as I could throw you. She smiled. That's far enough, she said. Come on, I won't eat you. Or, Chris thought, I could try and make a fight of it with this exceptionally powerful magic weapon, so powerful it's illegal, so sharp it cut Honest John's head off with one fumble. Even a novice like himself could probably put up a pretty good fight with a weapon like that. Maybe chop off her arms, or cut her in two, right down the middle. Or he could put it away. Now, before he did any more damage with it. Thanks for getting me out of there, she said. You've got no idea what it's been like, cooped up in that thing. Got you out, he repeated, and then he remembered what Jill had told him about the containment spells and how the casing was a prison, absolutely secure, that nothing could break out of or into except, of course, a pantocopt. Oh, he said. I see. Come and have a coffee, she said, with a smile that he could really have done without, and I'll explain. The other magic word. Well, he thought, at the back of his mind was some fairy tale or other where the wicked witch could only get you into her lair if you agreed to go. Maybe she couldn't kill him if he stayed in the car. Something like that. Supernatural rules of engagement were profoundly weird, so he understood, and as complex and Byzantine as tax statutes or EU directives, and Jill had warned him about her, and he trusted her. I sent the hummingbird, she said. Does that make any difference? It was no good. He had to ask. Why? I said I'd explain, she replied, if you come with me. Milk, no sugar, right? There were lots of fairy stories and folk tales about gullible men who met unscheduled beautiful girls, of course, men who went to sleep in enchanted castles and woke up 20 years later on cold hillsides, or who were never seen again. Always something nasty, never, ever, ever, ever anything nice. On the other hand, real life had its moments too. There aren't any fairy tales where the handsome prince marries a girl he believes is a fairy princess. but she turns out to have a turn of phrase like a drill, an insatiable desire for soft furnishings, and a constant need to talk about us. And 20 years later, the prince is woken up by the alarm at 6 in the morning in a Sanderson's catalogue bedroom to go to a lousy boring job to pay the awesomely vast mortgage on the enchanted castle. And maybe, just maybe, it all comes down to the same thing in the end. "You'll explain," he said. "Yes. Actually, it's milk and 1 sugar," Chris said. "And have you got any biscuits? I missed lunch." Yes, but it actually was a castle. It loomed at him out of the darkness as he closed the car door. A gatehouse with towers jutting out of a high wall, with a drawbridge and a portcullis, and absolutely everything. It was like... He stopped dead in his tracks halfway across the drawbridge when he realised what it reminded him of. It was like the plastic castle he'd had when he was a kid. The one that had come in the box set with the knights on horseback, with the holes in their hands you could clip little plastic swords and lances into, until you lost them. Exactly like it, apart from being bigger and built, presumably of stone. Or did all castles look the same? He hadn't paid attention in history, so he didn't know. Maybe they were all built the same, like houses on an estate. "This way," she said. "I know," Chris thought, as they passed under the gatehouse arch, and it was silly, but he couldn't help looking up, just in case it was there, though of course it wouldn't be. But it was, in huge letters carved into the stone, weathered by centuries of frost and rain, partly obscured by moss and creeper, but so big it was still perfectly legible. "Made in Hong Kong." "Ah ha ha," he thought, and he reached out to touch the wall. Solid, cold, and damp. Silly buggers, he thought. The door was oak, studded with nail heads the size of apples. It creaked as she pushed it open with a gentle shove. "Make yourself at home," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." The door slammed shut behind him, and he knew without trying it that it wasn't going to open for him. Pity. Make himself at home. Right. No need. It looked exactly as it had done when he'd left it that morning, right down to the cup of tea he'd left on the table and the TV listings magazine on the floor next to the sofa, which meant that either she'd lifted it straight out of his head, or else she'd been there. Neither of them exactly comfortable thoughts. "I get it," Chris said. "An Englishman's home is his." She sighed. "Don't tell me," she said. "It's one of those things that aren't supposed to be taken literally. Metaphors." He nodded. "I imagine they're buggers if you're not used to them." "Quite. Where I come from, we say what we mean." He sat down. Not in the armchair, where he usually sat. "And where would that be?" he asked. She perched on the edge of the table. Slim, elegant, a vision. "You don't know," she said. "I'd have thought she'd have told you, your friend." She said you were a... stupid word had slipped his mind. Sort of an elf who lives in trees. Did she now? Those perfect lips compressed into a line as thin as the blade of the tape measure. Fancy that. "It's not true then. You're not a dryad," she replied, pulling a face, as though she was anxious to get the word out of her mouth as quickly as possible. "Well, you aren't to know, I suppose, but for your information, dryads are 6 inches long and covered in knobbly grey bark, though not all of them have beards. No, I'm not one of them, thank you very much. She said, very slight pause. "Melodrama. I'm a princess of the Fae." Not fair, just because he hadn't been to Loughborough. I'm sorry, he said. "I don't know what that means." Oh, her eyes opened wide. "Really?" "Yes." "Oh, right. Well, in that case..." She broke off. "Stay there. I'll be back in a minute." Didn't like the sound of that at all. "What's the matter?" "The kettle just boiled." Whoever the Fae were, they made good coffee. He said so, and she grinned. Beginner's luck, then, she said. We don't use the stuff. In fact, we're allergic to it. What? Even decaf? She shook her head. What does coffee do? I mean, its most notable side effect. He had to think. It keeps you awake? That's right. Broad, slightly patronizing smile. That doesn't suit us at all, she said. The Fae only exist in dreams, you see. On this side of the line, at any rate. We have our own place, on the far side, but we prefer it here. It's warmer. Also, over there, we don't really exist. Not like we do here. The smile didn't fade. On the contrary, it froze. People use coffee to stay awake so they don't dream, and we can't come through. You can see why we aren't keen on the stuff. Chris couldn't think of anything to say. Actually, she went on, my particular subsection of the Fae have evolved past that. Well, she qualified. Evolved implies progress. Let's say we mutated to fill an otherwise neglected ecological niche. She was still just as beautiful as she'd been a moment ago, but now, as he looked at her, he couldn't help thinking about other images. Things with too many legs and eyes, pincers, carapaces, things that moved very fast and laid their eggs in their prey. Is that right? He mumbled. You don't like the sound of that? She was grinning. You think it's creepy? Quite. And crawly, for that matter. No, he whimpered. I don't know the first. My sect of the Fae, she said, cross the line in music. Think about it, she added, presumably reacting to the look on Chris's face. That's what music does. It takes you away from here and now to another place. In our case, literally. Instead of travelling through dreams, we write the music into your head, and once we're through, we exist. It was as though someone had just turned on the light. Music, the CD player in the car. Every time he talked to her, had a conversation, it had been just after he'd played music. Usually one of those compilation discs that seemed to breed in the glove compartment, none of which he could ever remember putting there. And just now, after the drive, turn the radio on, and she deflected his hand toward the CD player and... Hang on, he said. Now that's what I call really bad music 56. She shrugged. Each of us has what you might call a master key, a piece of music that can get us through, no matter what. Shake It Loose, by the Lizard-Headed Women. Well, she said, a trifle defensively, it's got to be something that doesn't get played a lot, or it'd be like living in Piccadilly Circus, portals opening everywhere you look. I chose a song nobody in their right mind would play deliberately. Sorry, she added with a dazzling smile, for any inconvenience. That's why I chose it, of course. Well, at least she was consistent. Jill said you're stalking me, he said. She said it's happened before, with SatNavs, and you tried to kill me. No, I didn't. Yes, you did, Chris shouted. When I was in that car park in the Ettingate retail park, you tried to kill me, but you cut the seatbelt instead, and I managed to get away. An oh, for crying out loud look on her face. One he'd inspired in so many people over the years, but never quite so intense. I was rescuing you, you half-wit, she snapped. At great personal inconvenience, let me add. I had to arrange for Shake It Loose to be played on the Jeremy Vine show, and he never does requests. It was sheer luck one of the technicians happened to fall asleep at just the right moment, and a friend of mine managed to get into his dream. That's why I was a bit late, she added. I'm sorry about that, but really, you shouldn't have got yourself into such a mess in the first place. Oh, Chris thought, it's all my fault. Should have known. It always is. I don't believe you, he said. Jill told me, and if it comes to her word against mine, she said coolly. I see. He was mildly startled by that. Well, yes, he said. She's one of my oldest friends. We've known each other since we were kids, and she's never lied to me or... And you're in love with her, SatNav said, all matter of fact, as though she hadn't just said out loud what he'd been not thinking for dear life for the last 16 years. It caught him off guard, like a sudden kick to the balls from a lollipop lady on a level crossing, and he didn't interrupt her as she continued. I know, it clouds your judgment, doesn't it? Just ask yourself this, though. Has she ever lied to you? Led you astray? No, Chris tried to say, but the word wouldn't come out of his mouth. It had launched itself when she said lied, but sort of bounced off led you astray, because there was one silly little thing, trivial, like Jill always having a plastic carrier bag, completely unimportant in the larger scale of things, but led him astray. She had a point there. Jill was the world's worst navigator, standing joke among all who knew her, endearing rather than infuriating, given that in all other respects she was so completely and utterly competent. But stick her in a passenger seat and hand her a map, and you were practically assured of a long and interesting ride to places you'd never even heard of before. It was a miracle, they said, that she didn't starve to death through getting lost between her living room and her kitchen. Of course, nowadays, with satellite navigation and stuff, it really didn't matter. And naturally, Jill had the latest state-of-the-art outfit on her dashboard, and the slight character flaw no longer mattered, but led him astray. Yes, loads of times, but that was silly, completely unimportant, nothing to do with trust and integrity and all those great big things. It was, really. Not like me, she said softly. You always know where you are with me. It was, Chris had to concede, a very eloquent appeal to someone who was always on the move. His life revolved, after all, around two questions. Where am I? What's the time? And no, she'd never led him astray, never lured him up a dirt track with grass growing up the middle, or stranded him on a desert airfield and told him he was in the centre of Wolverhampton, never tempted him to drive the wrong way down a one-way street, or off the edge of a gap in the middle of an unfinished flyover, and when she told him he was 4 miles from his destination and he'd be arriving there in 8 minutes, he could rely on that absolutely, a tiny island of reliability in the great ocean of doubt. Even so, what do you want from me anyhow? He said. Her eyes glowed faintly. Your help, she said. Please. That didn't sound right. Really? He said. What could I possibly do that would help you? I'm just a rep, and you're a... What did you just say you were? But there was an unmistakably self-satisfied look on her face, a unilateral declaration of victory that told him she reckoned she'd won. A princess of the Fae, she said. Are you ready for your explanation now, or would you like another coffee first? Where I come from, she said, is very different from here. Everything on this side of the line is so solid. It's like it's made up its mind what it's going to be, and that's all there is to it. It's not like that back home. Things change. Everything changes. Between pulling out a chair and sitting down on it, there's always the risk it might melt away or turn into a bottomless pit or a crocodile. Well, you know what it's like in dreams. The laws of logic and physics are different there. Oh, it's an exciting, challenging environment, but it can all be a bit fraught. Every time someone gets up to make a speech or a presentation, he discovers he can't remember his lines and he's got no clothes on. And you can't even walk down the street without being chased by wolves that look just like your old geography teacher. It's a miracle anything gets done at all. And as for the trains running on time, well, forget it. I guess that's why we like it here. More as a place to visit than somewhere you'd actually want to live. But there's definitely an appeal in knowing that if something was a cement mixer 2 minutes ago, It'll most likely still be a cement mixer in 5 minutes' time. You've got clocks and watches that actually make sense. And as for maps, don't get me started on maps. They're just so amazingly cool. My lot, the music fae, like I said, we're niche creatures. The other fae don't like us very much. It's not right, they reckon, messing with this side people when they're awake. It's sort of a religious issue, really. They say that if God had intended us to cross over in the daytime, he'd have given us a human race made up of shift workers and sleepwalkers. As you've probably guessed, we don't agree. We wanted to be able to get across any time we felt like it, and so we invented music. Well, where did you think it came from? It's not something that occurs naturally, after all. It's completely artificial, like maths. We sort of bred it into human DNA. Gradually, over the millennia, a little trapdoor inside every human head. Parasites! That's a bit harsh. I think symbiotic sounds nicer. Like the little birds who pick bits of meat out of crocodiles' teeth. After all, you get something in return. You get music. Not such a bad deal, is it? Especially since only 1 in a billion of you knows we even exist. Anyway, that's us. We think we're harmless, inoffensive creatures who just want to have fun. Your lot don't seem to see it that way. Admittedly, there have been times when our lot have gone too far. Only a few years ago, the Queen of the Orthodox Fae tried to invade your side of the line and exterminate the lot of you, which I'm prepared to admit was entirely uncalled for. And it's no thanks to us that she failed. But it cuts both ways. Your lot have done some pretty unpleasant stuff too. I mean, look at PCE. Oh, come on. You must have heard of... Fine, PCE. Pandemonium Consumer Electronics. Since you've clearly been living in a cave for the last 20 years. PCE was the pioneer in metaphysical variable state cybernetics, and do you know how they did it? Right, they built a new generation of intelligent, intuitive, non-Boolean electronic gadgetry by trapping our people in dream catchers, mutilating them, and using them to power their products. Computers, yes, but not just computers. Dishwashers, DVD players, microwave ovens, air conditioners, games consoles, you name it. Basically, it was slavery. They caught us, crippled one side of our brains so we couldn't ever get back to our side of the line, suspended us in stasis fields in sealed boxes. Well, I'd rather not go into it, if that's all right with you. It's not something any of us like to dwell on, but it kind of explains why Queen Judy felt the lot of you needed wiping out, and why so many of us went along with it. Anyway, that's all water under the bridge, as far as I'm concerned. And yes, PCE doesn't do that stuff anymore, though they're still in business. Very much so. Who do you think made me? You, Chris said. You mean you were... She smiled and shook her head. No way, she said. After the Queen Judy business, our lot and your lot sat down around a table and actually talked to each other for a change. PCE agreed to end the abductions and the brain surgery and the stasis fields, and in return we supply them with a certain specified quota of Fae every year. It's not perfect, but... Hang on, he interrupted, appalled by what she'd just said. You're telling me your government actually sends... She nodded. Convicted criminals, she said. Dissidents. It's the standard punishment for antisocial behaviour. We're pretty strict about that sort of thing. Oh, he blinked. Sounds a bit over the top if you ask me. Shrug. Depends on your point of view, I suppose, she said. In my case, it was disruptive thinking and serial failure to conform to stipulated dress codes. I got 70 years in a SatNav. Chris opened his mouth, then shut it again. 70 years? Actually, that's pretty lenient, she said earnestly. Please bear in mind, we live practically forever. We don't feel physical pain or anything like that, and time works in a very different way as far as we're concerned. Also, she turned her head to conceal a distinct hint of embarrassment. Well, there's some of us, me included, who'd rather be over here no matter what, even if it means being sealed in a plastic box, telling humans to take the third turning on the right at the next roundabout. In fact, she added, with a rather guilty grin, I made legal history back home by being the first convict to appeal against my sentence on the grounds that it was too short, so please don't get the idea that I'm not perfectly happy to be here. Quite the opposite. This is so much better than home. He thought about that for almost 15 seconds, then said, So you haven't been trying to, well, escape? Escape? No way. She seemed genuinely shocked by the suggestion. In fact, when my time's up, I'm seriously considering applying for metaphysical asylum and becoming a supernaturalized citizen. So escaping, not a bit of it. But you did, Chris objected. Jill said you got out of your box and came after me, he added lamely. She said, the raised eyebrow, the set mouth. I bet, she replied. Well, it wasn't like that at all. I came to find you, partly because I knew you were in danger, but mostly because I need your help, which is what this is all about, she went on. Bringing you here, I think it's time you knew what you're caught up in before you either ruin everything without realizing it or get hurt or both. A little voice in his head was yelling, but Jill said he'd have loved to listen to it, but somehow he knew he mustn't. Not yet, at least. All right, he said. Go on, then. It's about demons, she said. I'm assuming you know what they are. Well, I think it goes without saying that my lot dislike them as much as your lot do. They break into our space just like they do into yours, and they do a lot of damage, and sometimes people get hurt. We try and keep them out, same as you, and when they do get in, we hunt them down. 0 tolerance, simple as that. But it's not quite so straightforward. Well, nothing ever is. There are some demons, a few, very much the minority, who reckon that the traditional way of doing things just isn't sustainable. They're worried about how the demon hunters on this side are gradually learning how to beat them. Oh, it's no big deal as yet. 1 in 50 that breaks through actually gets detected in time, and maybe 1 in 5 of them gets killed. But the demons who are worried, the dissidents, they think that their lot have been seriously underestimating humans, especially their inventiveness and resourcefulness. The majority reckon that's rubbish. Only a handful of humans even know they exist, they argue, and the authorities would rather see the whole human race wiped out than actually tell them the truth, which isn't so far off the mark as far as I can see, but even so, that elimination rate's gone up 7% in the last 5 years. A trend like that. 5 years. Chris did the mental arithmetic. Since Jill had been in charge, he made a mental note to be impressed as soon as he could spare the mental capacity. So you see, they've got a point. If things go on like they are at the moment, the demons are going to find themselves pretty hard pressed. Humans are 90% of their food source, though they find it hard to accept. They could be staring extinction in the face. So what? Well, it's highly unlikely they'd just sit back and accept the inevitable. You'll start seeing coordinated raids in force, rather than just 1 or 2 of them hopping over the line for a snack. Escalation, leading to open war, and even if your lot rise to the challenge and fight back hard enough to win, just think of the implications. I mean, there's no way the authorities would be able to keep a lid on it if it came to an all-out invasion or something like that. And just think what it would mean for your lot, suddenly finding out that there are demons out there trying to invade you. Come to that, think what it would mean if the whole world knew about magic. It's the sort of thing that would wreck your entire civilization. Which means, basically, that the dissidents are probably your best chance as a species. Not a particularly comfortable idea, since they're so few, and their own people hate them so much. You think humans can be vicious and intolerant. You just can't begin to imagine what they're like. The thing is, though, it doesn't actually have to be that way. You see, it's not the flesh and the blood the demons need to live off. Demons don't have digestions and metabolisms. They don't need proteins and vitamins and carbohydrates. What they get their nourishment from is, well, for want of a better word, spirit, emotional energy. They kill people because it's the most efficient way of getting the emotions. It's true. They've studied it carefully, done the research. They're a very thorough species. Typically, a demon attack lasts 30 seconds. From the demon materializing in your dimension to the moment the victim dies. In that 30 seconds, an average human produces more emotional calories, panic, terror, disgust, despair, than it would in 12 years of ordinary life. It's a simple case of getting the maximum yield for the minimum risk and effort. But the dissidents say it's the wrong approach. They argue it's like the ways humans make electricity. You can boil more kettles and power more electric lights from milking one thimbleful of uranium than you'd get from 50 dinky little Notting Hill wind turbines in a year. Established fact. No arguments. But the uranium will poison the air and the water, and if you go on using it, sooner or later you'll all start glowing green and die, whereas all the wind turbines do is sit there making a gentle humming noise, which may piss off the house martins, but it won't kill you. Same, they say, with humans and emotion. Instead of going for maximum yield with maximum intrusiveness, much better to use the little and often approach. Human beings going about their ordinary miserable lives, the dissidents say, generate enough emotion to feed 1,000 times the current demon population, without the demons having to lift a claw to encourage them. The trouble is, it's all in small amounts, spread around terribly thin. I mean, in any square kilometre of your typical urban environment at any one time, you can reasonably expect to get 10 blazing rows, 15 long-term sulks, say a dozen arguments about whose turn it is to do the washing up, a couple of cases of road rage, 4 broken hearts, and a good 90 milligrams each of greed, lust, envy, anger, resentment, and depression. Add that up. You've got a square meal for a normal, healthy adult demon. The problem, though, is harvesting the stuff. I mean, it's not like recycling. Please sort your emotions and put them outside in the appropriate colour-coded receptacles. Trying to get the demons to live off that would be like trying to relieve famine in a disaster area by flying over it in a bomber at 20,000 feet, cutting open great big sacks of flour and chucking it out of the bomb doors. But that's where A776015 comes in. Sorry, Chris said. What? She frowned. I forgot. You don't know much about demons. Fine. Well, they don't have names. In fact, they can't. They're nomenclature intolerant. Your friend Jill knows all about this. Get a demon to accept a name, and he bursts into flames and dies. So they have numbers instead. All clear, or would you like me to draw you a flow chart? Sarcasm, he thought. The difference between sarcasm and a plane ticket to Switzerland was that he didn't need sarcasm right now. Perfectly clear, he said stiffly. You were saying? A776015 is the dissident leader, she said. A visionary, a truly great and original mind. She's figured out a way that demons can harvest the emotion they need unobtrusively, without your lot even knowing they're there. It really would work, I'm sure of it, if only she gets the chance to try. "Unfortunately," she went on, pulling a sad face, "that's not very likely. The orthodox demons hate the idea, won't hear of it. And if they catch her, they'll kill her, just to shut her up, which is why she's on the run," SatNav added, "and why you've got to help her." One of those 2 pages at once moments. When eventually Chris got his voice back, he said,
"Me. What the hell have I got to shrug?"
"Serendipity, really. You just happened to be in the right place at the right time." He thought. If that was her idea of the correct use of the word right, he had a good mind to report the editors of her dictionary to trading standards.
"Why?" he snarled, and then, because it was still bugging him like anything, "It was you, wasn't it? You wrote all over my bathroom wall all that stuff about saving the one who is to come."
"That's right," she said. "A776015 is the one who is to come. So glad you were paying attention."
"You cow," Chris snarled again. "It took me hours to get all those marks off."
"Sugar soap," she said. Of course he hadn't tried that. "I tried to warn you about the demons," she went on reproachfully, "but you didn't even try to understand."
"Well, it was a bit bloody cryptic," he snapped back defensively. "All that stuff about the one who is to come and the one who is cursed. Who the hell is that meant to be, by the way? And why a bloody hummingbird?"
But she wasn't paying attention. Looked like she just heard something. She put a finger to her lips and mouthed, "Shh." He could hear it too. Something between faint, distant whispering and the scuttling of mice. A fair bet that it wasn't anything nice. Suddenly, SatNav rose quickly to her feet and produced the long, thin sword she'd had in the Ettengate car park, apparently out of thin air. She nodded sideways towards the kitchen. Clear enough what she wanted him to do, but he stayed where he was. "What's?" She glowered at him. "They're coming through," she hissed. "Get out now!" Definition of "they," easily guessed from context.
"Oh shit,"
Chris thought, as he jumped up and darted to the kitchen door. He opened it and tripped over the doorsill of his car, hovered for a second, fell forward, bumping his head, and flumped into the driver's seat, banging his chin on the wheel as a sort of coda. The door slammed shut. The keys, he noticed, were in the ignition. SatNav's casing was suckered to the windscreen in its usual position, but the light was off and the screen was blank. Through the passenger door window he could see Honest John's shop front. Fine, he thought. Be like that. Just for fun, he checked the car's mileometer, which assured him he hadn't been anywhere since he'd noted the mileage when they'd arrived. Everything, in fact, to suggest that none of it had actually happened, and that he'd just left Honest John's place, apart, of course, from the little dangly mascot hanging from his rearview mirror. It definitely hadn't been there before. He'd have noticed if it had. A little plastic hummingbird directly in your line of sight isn't something you overlook. Chris felt as though he ought to be doing something, but nothing sprang to mind. Furthermore, he had other calls to make. He reckoned he could probably kiss Honest John's order goodbye, and he still had a quarter to meet. True, he could ring Jill. Probably he ought to do just that. For some reason, though, he didn't feel like it. Maybe something SatNav had said. He didn't even want to think about that. Someone was banging on the window. Angela, looking pale and scared. He wound the window down. "Where the hell were you?" She gasped at him. "I've been worried sick." "Really? I just..." He couldn't think of anything to say, truth or lie. Fortunately, Angela didn't give him the chance. "I waited and I waited for you, but you didn't come out, so I went back in, and that John person said you've gone the other way without saying where, so I came back and waited by the car, then went back in again, and there was John lying on the floor in pieces." "Sorry about that," Chris said awkwardly. "There was an accident, so I..." "An accident? He was all sliced up and still alive. What in God's name..." "Get in the car," he said. "I'll explain as we drive." Angela got in, and he noticed she had a scratch on her cheek. Loads of ways she could have got that. "Well," she demanded, as she fastened her seatbelt, "what happened?" But Chris was thinking, where is she? The Ettingate retail park demon had asked him, and the fugitive dissident visionary SatNav had told him about had been a she. The right place at the right time, The little plastic hummingbird started to sway on its short cord as he pulled away and joined the constipated traffic. Angela didn't seem to have noticed it. "Honest John flushed me down a toilet," he said, so cool and matter-of-fact. "Don't ask me why. He always was a bit of a funny bugger." "Down a toilet?" Chris nodded. "Sort of magically enchanted, I suppose, or I wouldn't have fitted. Bit of a bind climbing back out again." Was it his imagination, or had the hummingbird's plastic beak swung around and pointed at him as he said that? Anyway, that's what took me so long. And what the hell happened to him? It was horrible. He was... Well, he shrugged. So very Sean Connery. "I might have lost my rag a bit. I always wondered if the rumours about John being immortal were true. Looks like they are. I must remember to tell Jim Phillips next time I see him. He always reckoned it was a load of old socks." "You did that?" Another shrug. "It's like they say," he replied. "It's always the quiet ones. Anyway, that's all it was. No big deal. Now our next call's Arnott and Mayer in Tamworth. They're all right, but they'll try and shave us on discounts." Angela was unusually quiet all the way to Tamworth, which nearly made the whole being flushed down the bogs and then abducted by elves thing worthwhile. Fortunately, Chris knew the way like the back of his hand, so the vexed topic of navigation never arose. He used the unexpected peace and quiet to reflect on those parts of the day's adventures which he could bear to contemplate without wanting to curl up in a ball and scream. Honest John, for instance. It didn't really matter whether he was in league with the demons or whether they'd forced him to do it, threatened to blow his cover and grass him up to the product liability lawyers. Whatever. Clearly, it was another kidnapping attempt, like Ettingate, but that had been a washout as far as the demons were concerned. He told them he didn't know where she was, and they seemed to believe him. So why go to all the trouble of doing it again? And then there was this rigmarole about dissident demons, which might, if he believed a word of it, still very much undecided on that score, give him some idea of who she was. It occurred to him, not a pleasant thought, that it was just possible that he did know her whereabouts, not knowingly knowing, so to speak, but kind of knowing without knowing it. What, for example, if she was disguised as someone or even something else? What if... "Watch out," Angela said. "You nearly ran into the back of that Renault." Pot and kettle. But she had a point. Chris couldn't explain to her, though, why he'd just jerked the wheel and nearly caused an accident. It would be embarrassing. The thought that had struck him at that precise moment was, what if bloody Angela is her? Think about it. Angela comes bursting into his life. "Thank you so much for that, Mr. Burnot's. Just what I always wanted." And straight away he can't sneeze without a demon getting wet. No, really, he told himself. Hear me out, okay. Never had any of this kind of trouble before. Well, not since school, anyhow. So obviously something must have changed. There had to be some new element. Well, what? The only one he could think of was Angela. Yes, but she'd just admitted that she's really an undercover demon hunter, one of Jill's crowd. Think about that. If you were head of the Demon Busters, would you be in favour of a demon dissident movement or against it? No brainer. So, explanation number one. The demon hunters are helping the dissidents. Therefore, Angela, if she really is the dissidemon, knows enough about the organisation, DS, all that stuff, to bluff her way as one of them. Seeing DS on the stupid polo shirt, she had assumed, well, fine, various nits and loose ends there. We'll come back to that later. Explanation number two.
Jill and her crew are completely talon in glove with the disodemons, and someone, maybe even Jill herself, planted bloody Angela on Chris to act as unpaid and uninformed minder. A general rule of life he'd usually found to be reliable when faced with two alternative explanations of any given mystery: the more unpleasant one is, the more likely it is to be correct. Yes, he argued, more than a hint of desperation, but why me? Why pick on me to shepherd around a wanted fugitive with murderous fiends on her tail? Unfortunately, possible answers came flooding in as soon as he asked the question. Someone who moved around a lot in the course of his work. A moving target's always harder to hit. Also, someone who came into contact with loads of different people on the outskirts of the magic business. What if some of them were contacts, DS sleeper agents? He didn't know any of the technical terms, but he knew what he meant. What if going around with a travelling salesman was the perfect cover for Disodemon trying to rally support among a network of hidden supporters? Revoltingly plausible, Chris thought. Though, if that was a big idea, it clearly hadn't worked, because the demons had got on his case straight away. And anyhow, he argued, Jill wouldn't have landed him in something like this without the very least mentioning it to him first. Yes, replied his inner barrister, but maybe that was the whole point, because if he didn't actually know, the demons wouldn't be able to force the information out of him when they captured and tortured him. Extremely plausible, he had to admit, particularly since it had already happened at Ettingate. The more he thought about it, the more inevitable it became. Jill, stuck with the responsibility for the possible saviour of the human race, knowing that the orthodemons were breathing down her neck, desperately searching for someone she could palm the disdemon off on, had thought of her oldest friend and said to herself, "It'll be all right, Chris won't mind. He owes me about 1 billion favours going back 15 years. He's in love with me." Yes, but Jill wouldn't do that to me. Chris's inner barrister didn't see anything. Didn't have to. Yes, he thought bitterly, she bloody well would. If it was work, her job, something she truly believed was for the greater good. Ah, yes, that old thing. She'd always been keen on it, even at school. If there was a charity Red Nose Day, or sponsored pram race, or whale-saving leaflets to be stuffed through doors, or anything like that, you'd always find Jill there, running the show, volunteering anybody who didn't get out of the way fast enough. It was, in fact, the main flaw in her character, the sublime belief that nobody would really mind being put upon, bossed about, and monstrously inconvenienced, so long as it was for a good cause. He'd never quite been able to figure out how an otherwise rational human being could think that way, but all the evidence suggested that in Jill's case it was entirely possible. Saving the human race from an all-out war with demons. Well, yes, you could just about classify that as a good cause. Also, considering Jill's track record, the closer someone was to her, the more readily that person sprang to her mind when she was casting about for someone to lumber. Not the first time it had happened, either. What about the time when she could hardly sleep at night for fretting about the plight of the colony of Ibbetson's moorhens, threatened with loss of habitat by the proposed ring road extension? And who'd been the first sucker press-ganged into lying in the mud in front of the bulldozers? 3 guesses. Who'd been dragooned into picketing the school gates when Jill found out that the chipforks in the canteen were made from wood sourced from non-sustainable forests? Quite. From that sort of crap to landing him with a fugitive disodemon with a price on her horns was one small step for an idealist. Pretending he was checking his rear-view mirror, Chris glanced at Angela as she sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed in front of her, a human knot. So, the theory was pretty damn plausible. But how would you go about proving it? A direct question was probably not in the cards, but how do you find out if someone's really a demon in disguise? One of so many things, he reflected sadly, they never got round to teaching you at school. Frank Slade. Sunglasses, of course! Have to go about it the right way, of course. He paused, took a deep breath, settled himself. First, set the scene. So he reached up and folded down the sunshade. Actually, it was cloudy and a bit overcast, but he hoped Angela wouldn't notice. Drive on for a minute or so, squinting from time to time, as though troubled by the brightness of the sun. Then lean forward just enough to reach the glove compartment, catch, open it, eyes firmly on the road, scrabble about by feel, pull out the pair of sunglasses, stick them on your nose, and in one nice easy fluid movement, Bob's your uncle. He couldn't bring himself to look. What if he actually was right and she really was a demon, albeit a comparatively nice one? He wasn't quite sure he could handle that. On the other hand, at least he'd know for sure, instead of just harbouring nameless dread. Get it over with, he thought, and then it'll be done. Chris shifted his head around 10 degrees, just enough for a sideways glance. Not a pretty sight. Pale blue skin, hanging in sagging folds like that of an elephant or a rhino, 2 tusks jutting up from her lower jaw, meshing untidily with 2 companion upper jaw tusks jutting down, horns. Nothing you could legitimately call a nose, the ears a bit like cabbage leaves after the caterpillars have been at them. As for her chin, it reminded him of one of those comically misshapen carrots you see at flower shows, in the funny vegetables category. For all he knew, to demon eyes, she could be a real looker, but he'd really have liked to be able to wind down his window and throw up. That, however, was not an option. Pity. Chris fixed his stare on the road ahead, waited a bit, and then casually slipped off the glasses and stored them in his shirt pocket. Aren't there times, he thought, when you just hate being right? Ooh, but is he? Is Chris up to date on his demon spotting skills? I don't know. She sounded a little bit orcish to me. And it was nice to hear a little bit of a reference to Dame Judy. I mean, the thing is, she may have been a slightly evil, potential horrible person who was out to destroy the entire human race, but she was quite a fun character to play and to follow, and yeah, I quite enjoyed Countess Judy. Oh, I miss her, but then again, she was a very, very naughty countess and deserved everything she got. So, I hope you're enjoying this. Tell me your theories about Angela. Is she the Dissidemon? Or is she something else? Who knows? But yes, please, if you're enjoying this series, please bing, 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 hit the notifications bell. And if you like the chapter, if you can hit the like button, that'd be awesome. That really helps me out and it helps the channel out. It's always appreciated. And if you don't follow yet, and if you'd like to subscribe, it's free. It don't cost you nothing. If you'd like to subscribe and share, that's awesome. If you just want to subscribe, that's awesome too. And if you just want to come back each week and have a little listen to a couple of chapters, and we do one every other day, that's awesome too. And I bibble along now. I never used to, but I'm trying my best. But honestly, I do appreciate you being here. It just, as I keep saying, it makes it all worthwhile. And I love the comments section so much. Like, literally, those of you who've been with me for a couple of years now, few years now, it's just wonderful how it's grown this far. I'm so grateful, and it makes me smile every time I see it. Anyway, I'm going to stop getting all sentimental. People think I've got a flipping heart or something. And I'll see you in a couple of days. I need a new tune. Any suggestions? Take it easy. Stay safe.